The sun hadn't yet risen over the calm waters of the Chesapeake Bay, but for Chief Petty Officer Shannon Kent, the day was already old. While the rest of the naval base at Fort Meade was just beginning to stir, she was on her final repetition of a grueling workout. With a 50-pound rucksack strapped to her back, she moved with a focused intensity, her breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn chill. She'd then find the pull-up bar, knocking out a dozen strict movements without breaking a sweat. To the casual observer, she was the picture of a seasoned warrior, but her journey to this level of elite readiness was anything but ordinary. Years earlier, in the small rural town of Pine Plains, New York, Shannon was known more for her affinity for horses than for weapons. Growing up in the shadow of the 9/11 attacks, and which had a profound impact on her family, her father, a state trooper, and her uncle, a firefighter, were both first responders, she felt a deep-seated call to serve. In 2003, she enlisted in the Navy, not with the intention of becoming a sniper, but with a raw, innate talent that would become her deadliest weapon: a genius for language. The Navy quickly recognized her potential and sent her to the Defense Language Institute, one of the most challenging academic programs in the military. While others struggled, Shannon absorbed languages as if she were a native. She didn't just learn to speak, she learned to understand the soul of a culture. By the time she was deployed to Iraq in support of Navy SEAL teams, she was fluent in several dialects of Arabic. This was no desk job. Oh, she was a cryptologic technician, a title that barely scratched the surface of her duties. While the male operators kicked down doors, Shannon was often the one who got them through those doors in the first place. She would build rapport with local women, who were forbidden from speaking to the male service members, and extract critical intelligence from them. She could listen to intercepted chatter and, based on a single inflection or a colloquial phrase, pinpoint not just what was being said, but where the speaker was from and what tribe they belonged to. She was a paradox, a woman who could discuss American history with the same ease she used to debate Middle Eastern politics with a source. She was a mother of 2 young boys, yet she chose to deploy to the most dangerous places on Earth. She had a sharp, an analytical mind for the sterile world of signals intelligence, but her spirit craved the gritty reality of the dirt. This desire to be closer to the action led her to a course that few men even attempted, the Naval Special Warfare Direct Support Course. It was a physically and mentally brutal pipeline designed to prepare support personnel to operate alongside SEALs and Special Forces. It was a world dominated by men, a brotherhood where women were not just a rarity, but a seeming impossibility. When Shannon walked onto the course, she didn't just compete, she excelled. She became the first woman in history to complete it, earning the right to wear the uniform of those who support the tip of the spear. It was a quiet, unheralded achievement, but for those in the know, it was the first sign that Shannon Kent was not just another sailor. Oh, she was a force of nature, meticulously preparing for a role that didn't officially exist for someone like her. The desert wind howled across a clandestine forward operating base in Syria, kicking up dust that found its way into everything: weapons, equipment, food. Inside a cramped, sand-blasted operations tent, the atmosphere was tense. A Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC team, was planning a high-risk mission to capture or kill a high-value ISIS leader, a ghost who moved through the terrorist network's human scaffolding with deadly precision. The intelligence was fragmentary, the variables too many. On one side of the table, a CIA paramilitary officer argued for a risky helicopter assault. A Delta Force commander advocated for a slower, more deliberate ground infiltration. The debate was professional but deadlocked. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was calm, measured, and laced with the casual authority of someone who had already done the hard part. He moves his family on Tuesdays. His wife's mother lives in a village 6 kilometers east of the target. He goes there every other week. But that's not our window. All eyes turned to Chief Shannon Kent. She wasn't wearing a uniform that identified her rank or branch. She was dressed in nondescript tactical gear, an M4 carbine resting against the table, her appearance indistinguishable from the commandos, save for her slight frame. She continued, pointing to a spot on the map no one had focused on. Our window is Thursday night. The imam at the mosque near the target location gives a sermon on the virtues of the caliphate. Our target is known to be a pious man, but his wife hates the noise of the crowd. She makes him leave early before the final prayer. He uses a dirt track behind these buildings to avoid the checkpoints. He'll be alone, with only one bodyguard. That's where we take him. She hadn't just translated the intelligence. She had lived it. Her genius for language wasn't just about words. It was about the subtext, the cultural nuance, the unspoken fears and habits of the people she studied. She had pieced together this pattern from intercepted communications, from debriefs with sources, from watching satellite imagery with an almost obsessive focus. She was fluent in 7 languages, including multiple Arabic dialects so obscure that few Americans even knew they existed. Her ability to pick up the nuances of opinion and modern standard Arabic was legendary, but it was her understanding of the human heart in a war zone that made her invaluable. The men in the room, operators from SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force, men who were themselves living legends in the shadows, listened without interruption. There was no chauvinism, no skepticism. In the JSOC world, credibility is earned in blood and sweat, and Shannon had paid her dues tenfold. She was on her 5th overseas combat tour. She had survived nightly raids in Iraq, hunted terrorists in Afghanistan, and now she was in Syria, doing the most dangerous job of all, human intelligence. She would walk into villages with just a small team and an interpreter, knocking on doors to talk to people who might have information on the world's most wanted men. She was hunting ISIS cells and their leaders, including the caliph himself, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And one time, a high-value source, a man steeped in a culture where women were often invisible, scoffed at having to deal with her. Within 5 minutes of conversation, Shannon had extracted the exact location of a weapons cache that a week of SEAL interrogations had failed to uncover. She would later joke about it with her husband, Joe Kent, a Green Beret she had married on Christmas Eve years before. He had no idea what hit him, she'd say with a smile. He saw a woman. I saw a target. She had become one of the first female operators to be fully embedded with the most elite special operations teams, shattering the glass ceiling not with a sledgehammer, but with surgical precision. But the life took its toll. She was a mother to 2 baby boys, and the separation was agonizing. She had once battled thyroid cancer, a fight she waged mostly alone while her husband was deployed, only telling him after she had the surgery and was back on her feet a few days later. Her resilience was almost inhuman, but she was also deeply human. She decorated her home with mosaic tiles, she laid herself. She hosted an Arabic Thanksgiving every year, inviting Iraqi friends who had no family in the States, blending her 2 worlds into one table of peace. She was a warrior who dreamed of being a scholar, a mother who chose to be a soldier, and in the shadows of Syria, her legend grew with every piece of intel she produced. The olive-green helicopter thundered low over the Syrian desert, its rotors a frantic blur against the hazy sky. Inside, Shannon Kent sat strapped in, the vibration of the aircraft humming through her body armor. The mission was a routine one, or at least as routine as anything gets in a war zone. It was January 16, 2019, and the city of Manbij lay ahead. Her phone buzzed with a final text from her husband, Joe, who was thousands of miles away on his own classified assignment. The message was simple, the kind of mundane exchange that formed the bedrock of their extraordinary life. "I love you," she typed back quickly, her thoughts likely already shifting to the job at hand. Moments later, the helicopter touched down, and Shannon stepped off the bird and into a fireball. They had landed near a popular kebab restaurant, a place known to be frequented by U.S. personnel for a taste of normalcy. But normalcy was an illusion. An ISIS militant, a ghost wrapped in a suicide vest, had been waiting. As the team moved into the restaurant, the detonation ripped through the air, and the blast was a wall of sound and fire, shattering glass, shredding flesh, and ending lives in a millisecond. In that instant, Senior Chief Shannon Kent, the mother of 2 boys aged 1 and 3, the linguistic genius who could speak the language of enemies and allies alike, the trailblazer who had forced the most exclusive brotherhood in the world to accept her as an equal, was gone. She was 35 years old. Across the globe, Joe Kent felt the world tilt on its axis. He was pulled aside by a friend who delivered the news that every military spouse dreads. 4 Americans had been killed in a suicide bombing in Syria. 2 of them were women. Joe didn't need to hear the names. A cold, suffocating certainty settled over him. He had to call Shannon's parents, her mother and father, and shatter their world with the worst phone call imaginable. And then he had to get home to his sons, who were too young to understand why Daddy couldn't stop crying. He didn't get a stranger in a dress uniform knocking on his door. He was already in the fight, and now he had to face the ultimate cost of it. Shannon's death sent shockwaves through the special operations community. The Islamic State claimed credit for the attack, and she was officially recognized as the first female service member to be killed in action in Syria since the U.S. intervention began in 2015. But the true measure of her loss was felt in the quiet moments that followed. At her memorial service at the Naval Academy's chapel in Annapolis, Maryland, thousands showed up. They were SEALs, Green Berets, intelligence officers, and diplomats. They were men and women whose lives she had touched, whose missions she had enabled, on whose children she had sketched drawings for. The Navy posthumously promoted her to Senior Chief. She was awarded a slew of medals, but perhaps the most poignant honor was the inscription of her name on the cryptologic memorial wall. It reads simply, "They served in silence." For a woman who shattered so many barriers, the silence that surrounded her work was the heaviest burden of her service, and now, the most profound tribute. The house in the Pacific Northwest was quiet now, a stark contrast to the chaos of the life that had once filled it. Joe Kent moved through the rooms, a ghost in his own home, haunted by the absence of his wife. On the wall hung one of Shannon's mosaics, a beautiful, intricate table. She had designed herself to be the centerpiece of their family life. Now, it was a monument to a future stolen. Their 2 sons, Colton and Josh, were barely old enough to form memories of their mother. The older one might recall a flash of a smile, the feeling of being held, but the younger one would know her only through pictures and stories. It was Joe's mission now, the most important of his life, to make sure they knew who she was. He began to talk. He talked to anyone who would listen. He co-authored a biography, "Send Me the True Story of a Mother at War," so the world could know the woman behind the classified title. He described how Shannon was frustrated that she always had to explain herself, even in the military and intelligence world. "I have to take 5 minutes to explain to people who I am and what I've done," she would say, knowing that people might not believe her simply because she was a woman. Joe made it his mission to erase that need for explanation. He spoke at length about her on podcasts, detailing her linguistic genius, her physical prowess, her relentless drive. He told the story of how she could march for miles with a 50-pound ruck, do a dozen pull-ups, and then sit down and discuss 19th century literature. He told them how she faced cancer with the same stoic resolve she brought to a firefight, and how she never ever let being a woman be an excuse for being anything less than the best. In the world of the Navy SEALs and Special Forces, her legend grew in depth. The story of the woman who walked into a tent full of hardened commandos and changed the course of a mission became lore. The fact that she had been a wife and a mother only added to the awe. She had navigated a world that was not built for her. She had excelled in it, and had been taken from it not by a bullet in a firefight, but by a coward in a crowd. Yet, her legacy was not one of tragedy, but of transformation. Because of her, the path was a little less difficult for the next woman with the gift for language and the heart of a warrior. The barriers she broke down, being the first woman to complete the Naval Special Warfare course, being one of the first to be fully embedded with JSOC teams, were now open doors. Years later, a new generation of special operators would be briefed by a female intelligence officer, and no one in the room would bat an eye. A young sailor with a knack for languages would look at the possible career paths and see direct support to special operations as an option, not an impossibility. They would walk that path, driven by the same quiet determination, and perhaps at the end of a long day of training, they would hear a story. A story about a woman with no fancy badge or high-profile public background who could speak the language of the enemy better than they could. A story about how, when she walked into the team room to brief a mission, every SEAL in the room, men who had stared down death 100 times, would put down their gear and listen. Not because she was a woman, but because she was Shannon Kent. And in that simple act of attention, they would pay the highest honor to a warrior who proved that true excellence needs no badge, only a will of iron and a mind like a razor's edge. Her name, once spoken only in whispers, is now a permanent part of the foundation upon which a more inclusive and lethal force is built.